Coming up on the Angus Report, the latest in cattle ID.
What does recent government investment in rural infrastructure mean for farmers and ranchers?
Cattle handling can reduce stress on handlers, but it can also lead to better carcass performance on the rail. Find out how.
And we congratulate association regional managers for their recent industry recognition.
This is the Angus Report. Hello and welcome to the Angus Report. I'm Bob Cervera.
And I'm Clint Mefford.
Our top news this week. IDing cattle used to just involve a regular plastic tag. But today, the world of cattle ID has evolved into a much more complex and innovative system that involves technology with electronic identification. Allflex USA Great Plains Regional Manager Andy Dorn tells us why the field has seen so much change.
It's really a push for intensive management. And then now the traceability talk for animal disease traceability and being able to find those animals a lot faster to segregate them and to quarantine herds and not have to quarantine the whole U.S. is a big thing that electronic ID can help us with. Cattle ID, it can make a producer's life easier through the form of electronic ID, really. Basic mistakes that cause time, maybe not at the shoot, but afterwards, and getting those IDs translated correctly into a full-blown management system, that's where I see the biggest push and time saver is on mistakes not happening. The future of ID is animal health monitoring for us. That'll be something that is adopted or put into the marketplace to be adopted that helps producers with health scoring, estrus detection, those type of things. And it's a really cool technology that's coming out of our dairy industry. That's where it started, but the beef people are really going to value it as well. Finding the sick animal before he has a temperature spike, that's a huge win for us. And if we can do that and cut some costs on that end, we can do a lot of big things on the other side of our business and for our consumer as well.
Visit allflex.com to learn more about ID management systems.
Cattle fever ticks were once eradicated from the U.S., but have since made a comeback in southeastern Texas. Recently, animal health officials released an environmental assessment report that moves them closer to enacting an eradication plan. The pesky fever tick carries and transmits invasive pathogens that destroy red blood cells. Once infected, susceptible cattle have an 80 to 90% mortality rate. The USDA established a 500-mile quarantine zone along the Rio Grande River to prevent ticks from reestablishing. But cattle fever ticks have moved outside that quarantine zone on wildlife carriers, like white-tailed deer. That prompted the USDA and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to develop the eradication plan. Focusing on 2 wildlife refuges, the plan recommends using ivermectin-treated corn to treat cattle grazing in those areas. Since cattle are the preferred host, feeding treated corn will help monitor tick populations and kill the pesky bugs.
Rural infrastructure recently got a funding boost when the omnibus spending bill passed last month. The legislation authorized a $600 million grant and loan program for rural broadband, and the USDA announced a $276 million investment in rural electrical infrastructure projects. That's all good news for rural America, but how exactly will those investments impact all the small towns that dot the American countryside? Rural Broadband Association CEO Shirley Bloomfield shares how the investments will impact those small communities.
I really look at broadband as honestly the 21st century superhighway, and as we spend so much time here in Washington, D.C. these days talking about infrastructure, I really think this is the analogy of how we bring these rural communities, and particularly farmers and ranchers, how do we keep them connected to their markets? How do we ensure that they have the same economic opportunities that somebody in a more urban area might have? And frankly, the world has gotten really small, and broadband and access to those resources is really what is going to increase time to market, pricing issues, the ability to actually use smart agriculture. All of those things I think are going to be deployed by broadband. So $600 million will not go as far as we'd all like it to go. It will also be a combination of a pilot grant and loan program. So, there's a lot of work to be done to determine exactly what that program is going to look like. But the good news is it's going to be administered by the United States Department of Agriculture, and within their rural utility service. So the thing that actually gives me hope for our nation's farmers and ranchers is this is a broadband program that is going to actually be administered by the agency that actually understands rural America the best.
Visit ntca.org to keep up with the Rural Broadband Association.
You have to think like a cow in order to understand how best to handle cattle. That's according to Lily Edwards Calloway, who's assistant professor of animal sciences at Colorado State. She studied under Temple Grandin at the university and shares how proper handling can lead to better performance on the rail.
I think particularly when they're going to market, there's a lot of things that the animals are asked to do, a lot of different handling events, and so we're kind of giving them the opportunity to potentially be bruised if we don't minimize how we're handling them with stress. And so I think things to think about are facility design is one, and like we talked about, sometimes we can't help that because we have to work with what we're given, but I think there are some things looking at sharp corners, asking the animals to maybe move a different way through a facility, trucks, and so some studies that have been done look at risk factors, and so I think the size of the animal is going to impact if they're going to be bruised or not, depending what we're putting them through, if they're banging their backs. The type of trailer that we're using has been shown to impact that, and so I think it's taking off small bites and almost looking backwards in the process, because we kind of have to do that. We don't see the bruise until the animal's dead, and so we do need to kind of take all the events that happen before that and put them together to kind of tell that story of how the bruise got there. So I think bruising has a huge animal welfare impact, of course, but also economic impact on the cattle industry. And so in the Tiffany Lee paper from K-State, they quoted an industry partner saying that bruising costs the industry $35 million a year. And so that's huge, right? And so when an animal's bruised and that product comes through a packing facility, that bruise has to be trimmed off. And so it sometimes devalues certain cuts of meat, and then it can't be used for the true value of what it had. And so it's used for, it goes to rendering, but it doesn't have the same value that it was meant to have.
Edwards Calloway was a speaker at the 2018 National Cattlemen's Beef Association Convention. Visit angus.org/media for more event coverage.
The Livestock Slaughter USDA report, released March 22nd, reveals that beef production is still on the rise. At 1.98 billion pounds, February beef production is up 3% compared to last year. Up 2% from February 2017, 2.42 million head of cattle were harvested in February this year. And the average live weight was 1,368 pounds, up 8 pounds from last year. For the first time in more than a decade, the USDA March Cattle on Feed report showed a year-over-year increase of 9%. The total inventory for 1,000 or more head of feedlots was 11.72 million head. Last year, 10.77 million cattle were on feed at the same time. That's a lot of growth, and it translates to a lot of beef. Visit USDA.gov for more market reports.
Manure. How much is it worth? According to an article by University of Nebraska Extension agent Rich Kelsch, it might be worth more than you think. Manure can contribute to improvements in soil quality and increase yield, but manure has several economic benefits as well. Many fields require a supplemental source of phosphorus and nitrogen, and manure can serve as an alternative to traditional chemicals. Beef manure in open lots contains plenty of phosphorus, but not as much ammonium N. Slurry manures captured by a barn with slatted floors conserve the ammonium N that's lost by open lots. Kelsch recommends using slurry manures immediately to gain the most ammonium N benefit. And in his article, Kelsch says manure's value is fully realized only when it's applied to fields that require phosphorus supplementation. Visit extension.unl.edu for more information.
When we return, we visit with a Center of the Plate specialist at the 2017 Certified Angus Beef Annual Conference.
Then we celebrate the recent accomplishments of 2 association regional managers. Visit angus.org to continue watching this episode of The Angus Report.